I have really been avoiding a particular part of working with the web viewer that I need to come to terms with. I've been brooding about it for a while here. So I'm going to I'm going to find the solution. This is something I know that other people do. Again, I have not wanted to do this. When I teach people how to work with JavaScript and FileMaker, I suggest that they have a blank web viewer on the layout, and then you run a script to load everything. I have thousands of those where that is the case, and I like that idea because for me, it's nice to let to me a script handle the work. So here's a Gantt chart that I'm working on as a template. And, it's just the same rigmarole that I always do, where this script loads the stuff. And then my JavaScript has a window.load widget function where the data gets passed in, and then it actually gets rendered to the chart, to the DOM, to the div. I like this. There's great advantages to it because I can pass in the data here in one shot, and it is good to go. That's really useful, of course, when you're coming to a layout. You can put a layout trigger on that, or you could have a button that loads it or whatever. But when you're dealing with a web viewer that's in a layout of its own, it's not as easy to work with this and get it to run a script. Yes, you can have a trigger on here on this layout, but the reason this came up is because I'm working with a client who has one layout where there's a bunch of slide panels, and each slide panel has a different web viewer, and some of those need to load charts, like an Apex chart library. So I was really struggling with, okay, am I going to tap into their scripting, their navigation script, and then do a bunch of branching logic? Or should I just bite the bullet and make these dang things self-loading from now on? So that's what I'm dealing with right now, and I guess I'm having to grow up and make my web viewers self-loading, not self-loathing, self-loading.
Self-kicking.
Self-kicking.
Yeah.
Wait, that's my motto.
rather than automated kicking machine, of them self-kicking.
So the reason I don't like this method, even though it's beautiful, when you come to the layout, it just loads. When you go to a new record, it just loads. It's not going to because it's based on some data. It just loads. It acts like a portal. It acts like everything else in a FileMaker layout, where it just shows up, right? I like that idea, but it's got a lot of disadvantages. And of course, the way that I teach people is not this at the moment. So I have to restructure my philosophy and how I think web viewers should be loaded. Adam, when you work with web viewers, do you have them always load themselves, or do you use a script?
Yeah, but I define the event listener.
Okay.
And I use the DOM. I must check how the name is. And this is an event listener which is provided by the browser, and it's starting a function when the HTML and the JavaScript part is already loaded. So when this is triggering,
it's like undocument ready or something like that, is it?
Yeah, I look. What's the
Okay.
And
Okay. Yeah. And how about you?
But it's very similar to your usage. Yeah? So
okay.
Your method.
Do you do that, Gabe? Do you do always a self-loading one?
Yeah, I tend to do them always as self-loading. The way I do them is the contents for each of the web widgets is in a global variable that when the user starts up, the code for every widget that they ever need is loaded into memory. So it takes, you kind of pay the the time up front, and then all of the web viewers are then self-loading, and they then, if they're calling data, then have a JavaScript function to say perform file, make a script, go and load the data and then bring it back in again. Or in some places that's inlined, where rather than doing a script to call, the it's effectively substituted in there, which is the other way of doing it. And then it's evaluated from the context of the layout. So
okay. Marcus, how about you? Have you transitioned to using
I tend to do a search for the FileMaker entity. I can't remember what the proper name is. And then once that's ready, I like to do an FM Gopher fetch for my data.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah. I'm using also always for a few months, I would say, the FM Gopher, because everything is checked by this library because of the missing FileMaker object when you start the web viewer. Yep. And there is a small gap where you don't have this element, this object. So FM Gopher is taking care of this. And I posted a link to the event listener type DOM content loaded. Stream. So this is what is firing when everything what is needed is already there.
So
the libraries the libraries that I used, two of the jQuery based ones, it's the same event, but it's the on document ready for data tables and for full calendar, that then it says when it's loaded, but it's the same thing.
I like that method. The problem is, so there's certainly some good parts to that. There's some good things to that, in that it does load itself. That's great. The problem to me is that there's multiple ways to do it, and it can get complex really quickly, I think. So I'm kind of figuring out what is the most approachable way. What is the way that we can grasp it a lot better. So let me just show you things that I've been thinking about and talking about. And I've done this many times. I can turn a widget that I've built into a self-loading function, a self-loading web viewer. That's not a problem. I think that I need to let my development environment show that a little bit more, and just maybe make that by default from now on.
Well, so can I comment on that, Jeremy?
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree with what you just said around keeping it simple. The whole point of the environment is make this accessible to people who don't play in the JavaScript world. And when I started with you, this was such a foreign concept to me that I needed it as simple as possible to make it work. And it didn't take me long once I figured that out. On my video on screen, but it didn't take long once I figured that out to then, go figure out a different method if I wanted it. Okay. So I think that keeping your environment as simple as possible for the most basic usage, but then, when you do your npmx command, and you can pick one of the options is to pick the self-loading variation, but your default is still your kind of default, because it is consistent. It is very simple. It's got some downsides, but most new people aren't going to get bit by them.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And
I suppose the question I would say are the two genuinely two advantages and disadvantages, where some one route is better than the other, in the case that then it is worth maintaining two different versions? Or is it that actually the self-loading way, which is what seems a lot of us doing it, would the recommendation be to say, well, that should be the default way that it's loaded? So rather than going to a layout, having a script fired by a button or a script trigger, rather than, to me, it seems conceptually simpler to put a web viewer on the layout with some code in it, to then say, here's where your data comes from a field or from wherever.
So So Gabe, the reason I don't think that's simpler is for a FileMaker developer, they don't think in JavaScript ways. And so in order to do a self-loading, you've got to get the concept of synchronous and asynchronous. And the way Jeremy's doing it is you load this thing and you call a script. And I think FileMaker developers get that because they already do that. And whereas self-loading is kind of an advanced or moderately advanced, a moderate user kind of trick, right? In terms of understanding, like the first time I saw self-loading, I thought, how is this script getting called? I didn't call it. What the hell is going on here? It made no sense to me. So just, I agree with you, Gabe. It's a better experience. And once you understand what you're doing, it's the reason why I think the three of us have all said, yeah, I self-load all the time. But I do think it's a moderate to advanced user technique, personally.
But okay, yeah, let's look at that and see which one is more advanced, because there are a couple of ways to do it, and you all have mentioned it already. The way that I have a chart that is supposed to bring in some data, and it's supposed to extract all of the options that they've chosen out of the object that comes in, and then use it in the chart options. Now, normally I would pass this object in via that window.load widget, but here what I'm choosing to do is and I really hate that, I hate this so much, is do a stupid substitute where I'm asking FileMaker to substitute out this for the object that this is supposed to be. I don't like this. I hate the substitute because this isn't valid JSON. Well, this wouldn't work outside of FileMaker. That's what bugs me about it so much. This wouldn't work. I could probably put in some logic, if props doesn't make any sense, then use this default object, whatever. To me, that's all really silly. But I chose this way at the moment because I needed to get this done quickly. So props is the substitution. And then I'm using a custom function that I stole from the add-ons called self-boot. And after constructing all the props into an object, I'm passing that in, and then it just gets put in, and the calculation engine, the custom function goes and it fetches the data from the HTML page. So I do like that I can still have my HTML page, my HTML record. I can still have my HTML record, and then I do a substitute down here, and I add the prefix and stuff. But I'm fetching the HTML. So I'm not putting it into a global variable. I'm not putting it into a field on this layout. I'm still able to use my deploy method to make changes, and then this custom function is just always going to grab the latest code. So this works. I had to construct this data object here, or this data array in this case, to match what Apex Charts wants and get it all to work. So this was kind of annoying, but it works. The calculation is buried inside of the web viewer. I don't like that. I don't like that. But it is a method to do it. And so now this thing will self-load. And as long as the fields that are in context are actually in context, then I don't have a problem, and this will just work. So this is a way, I know this is sort of a way that we did with the add-ons, although the add-ons then go and fetch the real data. It just passes in some initial props. But this is a method, and this could work as well. It really limits where this web viewer can be used, but it does ensure that it's always going to load. Do you see disadvantages to having the data actually here inside of the calculation engine and then it being substituted in? I know both people have already mentioned that they go and fetch the data using FM Gopher, which is another method, but what's a problem with this idea? Is there any problem with this? Any downside to this?
When you change the fields, you need to go to here inside this and change the fields. There is field references. I think what could it be better than when you have one field inside the database which you are grabbing? You have the custom function, so you can also grab with the custom function. You can also grab the data, not just the HTML data, but also the data for the widget.
Yeah. Yep, could do that.
I think it also depends on in how many different places this widget is used, because in this instance, the code lives on a given layout. That instance of the web viewer takes these properties and calls that, whereas in my use case, a lot of the time, you've got lots of different web viewers across lots of different layouts and, you know, in a car view and different bits and pieces like that. And they may use the same or different parts of code. So the way I would tend to do it is have the web viewer just load the blank library, which then calls a script to go and fetch its data. So rather than having it be substituted and be calculated in there, that from the context in which the web viewer loads, the only real difference in that instance is rather than doing a on layout enter or on record load to pre-generate the content and call that in the web viewer, the web viewer loads. As Adam said, you use the on document ready. Once that's ready, it then does using FM Gopher to perform a script in FileMaker, fetch the data and return it back. And then you've got more of that code lives in the JavaScript to say, right, I'm calling and I get the data back in whatever format. And then you just have then one script centrally, which then says, do this. And it can then take different context cues to say, right, well, if the layout it's called from is this one, then provide this data, or if it's something else.
Yep.
That's more of the way I tend to do it, which is, I think, is a bit more flexible than having a lot of it stored in the calculation for the web viewer.
Yeah, for sure. Scripts are easier to manipulate than calculations. Calculations, you have to go into layout mode, and if someone else is editing this layout, then you're out of luck. Scripts are so much easier to work with. So this probably, to me, this is, I don't know if this is the next step up or if it's just something we should avoid altogether. I love the idea. And I think I'm actually on the latter train where everyone else is. I think, to Marcus's point, I want to start helping people understand how to self-load this thing and how to get the code itself to fetch its own data whenever it needs it. Yeah.
And thinking about it, I do it this way, but it's often in a context where there's multiple web viewers loading and they all just need to run something independently, where you can't really have multiple scripts firing at the same time. So I've got a bunch where I've got a load of graphs, and they're just inline code that just says from this layout get like number of open tasks, number of whatever, and I've got 4 different web viewers, you know, that show them. So they kind of have to be self-loading, because otherwise you're going to have when that layout loads, you've got 8 different web viewers. They each want to load a different thing because that's where they are on the layout. So for some use cases, it is quite useful to do it this way, actually.
How about you, Brad? I forgot to ask you, have you dived into doing kind of a self-loading web viewer?
I've really just gone to almost always doing it kind of the way that you taught in the thing. I have a table, the HTML, and then I push it in manually all the time, like push it in every time I load it.
Okay. And that works for you, right? Because you're going to a layout with a web viewer. You already have a script running to go to that layout. You might as well just jack that load widget script into that script, the navigation script, and it just works just fine, right?
Yeah, it works great. I suppose the only reason I would do this is if you had someone else using it and they updated the field, then that would trigger this refresh, right?
Yes, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, if you want to
because
see
of the calculation.
Right.
because of the
That's what I'm
calculation.
saying, yeah.
So that's a good point. If this field were changed, then this thing would freshen up. It would wipe itself out. Where we don't want that. We would rather have it use the API to adjust the bar heights based on what was updated by someone else. So that gets even more complex, but it certainly is possible. So
I think it depends. I think it depends on the context. If you've got a quick second, I could just show where I do it in situation. I do it in 2 different ways on the same layout for a different reason, if that makes sense.
Get that started up. I wanted to ask. Oh, go ahead. I want to ask Mark too about what his thoughts are in seeing this. Go ahead.
So in here, I've got a data table view in here, which loads a load of tasks, and there's a bunch of different tab panels that do different stuff on it. So this loads a bunch of tasks, and that's all great in there. But actually at the top here, I've got a combination of different things. These 2 kind of counts in here that show the count of tasks open and closed. These are actually a self-loading web viewer in here, which just has a real simple bit of code that goes off and counts the number of tasks and shows a progress bar in here. So I've got 2 of them inside of here, and because I've got this web viewer in here, which is doing a call out to get the tasks, load them back in again, and draw them and refresh them in here. Because I've got loads of other chunks of layout objects in here, I've got some calculations and buttons and other bits and pieces in here. Having these 2 as self-kicking web viewers that's effectively just calculated content allows it to then get these counts immediately, even though the data down here takes a couple of seconds to load because it's loading. It depends how many hundreds or thousands of records you've got inside of it. So in that instance, I'm doing these 2 web viewers self-kicking because it's kind of separate, and as I complete tasks down here and as other things in the system can complete those tasks, when this data gets updated, these just refresh with a different amount.
Yep, that's cool.
Hours late, and that's done in there. So in here, like this refreshes, but these kind of auto kick like that. So that's maybe a slightly more one example where I'm doing both at the same time, and the other reason for doing that.
Mark, what do you think? You've gone through the course too. I know you're not actively using it so much, but would you rather have a self-booting web viewer, or do you like the method that you learned in the course? Does it matter to you?
I mean, it depends. I guess it really depends on the situation. For my company, anything self-loading, when you go to a layout, it needs to load the portal. I think it needs to load the data immediately. I do have a few layouts in my system that do dashboards, and you've got multiple different sections of that one layout that pulls data. It pulls counts from 5 or 6 different related tables or execute SQL functions, pulls cost summaries, and it does that across the board. And doing that on a self-loading would be a little bit of a pain performance-wise. So I have a button on there, and anytime they go there, they just click the one of the buttons, and it loads the data for everything at the same time. But self-loading for me would probably be the primary, the main thing for me. It needs to be self-loading because no user wants to be able to. I mean, for me, it's less clicks. It's like in the web world. If you click somewhere in a website and you click more than 3 times, 9 times out of 10, people are going to leave your website because they've already clicked 5, 6, 7, 10 times just to get to one little section of your website. I mean, there's a couple of real big companies that does that right now that I've got to click multiple times to get to something, and it's a real pain.
Well, that's a good point. You also bring up an interesting point. If your web viewer needs to fetch data from different sections of your database, you can't use FM Gopher 7 times. You could use FM Gopher 7 times to go fetch the data, but they can only run one at a time. I guess I don't fully know how promises work. I haven't looked at the under the hood, but you could have multiple awaits or async mechanisms in your system and those can fetch data. I don't know if they fetch them in parallel or if they fetch them one at a time. They fetch them in parallel, Adam? Is that where you...
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Yeah.
They can do, but your queue there is the FileMaker scripts, isn't it?
Right.
Each one's
Yeah, that's
gonna
what I was
trigger a
saying.
script.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
depending on if you say
there's a workaround.
wait, put it at the end, then it will process the first one, return that, and then it'll do the next one, depending on if it's like halt or interrupt or pause and resume. Okay.
So the way I've gotten around that is I have a call on my anyways, the data takes a while to get back. It was pausing everything. Nothing was loading while I was waiting for that promise to come back. So what I did was I sent it off to FileMaker to run a script, and FileMaker script then does the data fetch in a perform script on server with callback. Okay. And then it just immediately returns back and says success. So then JavaScript keeps moving on, and then when the callback comes back, the callback script then calls a function in the JavaScript widget to load that data. And that way I can do really snappy, like the whole system doesn't pause while I'm getting the data fetch. And then I just have to be able to manage, I don't know when that data is coming in, and the user may have already loaded. So then I have to be able to manage that in a stateful way and React so that everything re-renders once that data finally arrives, which honestly isn't that challenging to do. You just got to think about the logic around that. So you can do it concurrently in that sense, like then you're not waiting in a chain for everything to finish.
And also when you do it that way, it's like any script to do perform script on server will take a minimum of 2 seconds to round trip, start the session on the server, and kind of come back. So if the chunk of work is bigger than that, then it is worth sending it off to the server because you'll process it quickly and then return, to be able to do it. So if it's like loading a widget or something like that,
I wouldn't do it for fetching the HTML, for example. That makes no sense, right?
So if it's a really big heavy thing that has to be looked up, then it's a good way to do that with the callback results, because you can return then the data, isn't it? But I've done it before the callback stuff. I've done it where it puts it in it makes a record. The script that's sending it saves an ID of a record, which the server then, once it's finished, puts the results in that record, which you have related via global field. So you're basically saying, go off when you've finished, write it into this data, and then obviously locally in the client, it knows you've got a global field based on that primary key to that result record. When that data gets written in, then you've got whatever to do with it. But that's quite
the other nice
back in the day.
Well, the other nice thing about doing that is that your data doesn't get truncated as well, and it bypasses that truncation.
The limit, whatever it is. What is the callback? Like 10,000 characters or something? It's not massive.
So it's not a lot. No.
Jonathan, what do you think? I know you're working on your dashboards and stuff.
Honestly, I came in late. I kind of missed the beginning, so
we just started. We were talking about you, and then we transitioned over to this stuff right when you came in. So.
Yeah, but I'm not sure I understand the concept of when you're saying the auto load. You're saying that's through the web viewer load, like it kind of loads as opposed to. I think I've seen this once before, but I haven't really. I think, like Marcus said, it kind of confused me as to how it worked at first, and then I haven't actually. And that was probably a couple months ago, so I don't even remember.
Let's look at it again in a base.
Jonathan, you're proving my point, buddy. I appreciate it.
So this web viewer runs off of a custom function. The custom function, the only thing that it does is it goes and gets the HTML. I'm passing in some initial props, but none of this is necessary for my widget. So I could just remove it and that would be fine. What happens is, let's watch the script workspace or the debugger. What happens is, and this is what the add-ons do, is as soon as this calculation engine kicks off and resolves itself, notice that it's already loaded data tables into the web viewer. There's no data, and it immediately runs a script called go fetch the data.
Right. So I've seen it happen. I just don't remember how did you set it to do that?
Yeah, that's where where in your JavaScript it comes in play to use that I'll try to start up a demo here. But inside of the JavaScript is a FileMaker, is a fmgopher.perform script function, which goes and fetches the data and then passes it in through the API to the table.
When I can say something, this depends on the library or the widget that you are using. This is very dependent on this, because sometimes when you load the web viewer, you don't see anything until you get the data to display the widget. So in this case, you see the loading information.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you, for instance, when you use the full calendar, the web viewer is white until the data from FileMaker comes, and then it shows the.
But then you could put a spinner in there saying loading. That's what
it is so fast. It is so fast that the user doesn't realize that he has to wait for this.
Let's see if we can. I'll see if I can spin one up, but it doesn't have to be dependent, because you could load the web viewer, you can load the table with the columns, and then you can use the library's API to put the data into the web viewer, right? I don't think I did it here. I think you're right. It's still the same thing, where after I get the data back, then I'm going to go ahead and load the whole chart, or the whole table. But this just allows me to not have to run it. It's still got to run a script. So, a script to control when it loads, or a script to control when the data loads. It's the same thing. You still got to run a script to fetch the data. I don't know which one's the most correct path. Letting a script load the code in the way that I do it and fetch the data and then push the data in at the same time, or load everything and then go fetch the data a couple seconds later. So,
I mean, coming from a user perspective, and this is what I try to do is, like most of y'all said, having a white screen with nothing on it, the user feels, hey, something here is broken.
Yep.
Doing it like you just showed, Jeremy, and in this case, it's really, the data is really quick, so you don't see the loading, but loading something on the screen, like at least the structure of the data table, and having the word loading somewhere on there. Personally, I'd make it a little bit more visible somewhere, but at least having the word loading so the user knows, oh wait, it's loading data, so I'll give it a second.
Yep.
Something like this, you're only load 19 records, so it's you never see the word loading on there. But if the data set, it's easy.
If FileMaker would just give us some sort of indicator that, I don't know, FileMaker was actually doing something, we could probably save a lot of trouble on the user end.
I would love.
You don't like the coffee cup, Jack.
It's locked up, so I killed it. Okay.
A skeleton is kind of the newest thing to put into a web viewer when data is not present. So
that's something Facebook's been doing for years.
Yeah.
It's that exact thing right there. They've been doing that for years.
Yeah. So maybe what I should do is make my development environment have a default state that's a skeleton, and then load something into it. I don't know. It gets it. And the more we talk about this, the more I'm like, man, this is going to get complex really quick. I'm on Marcus's side, where you really got to know the web viewer and know how to work with it before you start dealing with this self-loading stuff, or before you start designing widgets that load themselves and kick off all of what it needs. All of us here probably are ready to graduate into that master's level of web viewers, but I would be scared to let people start doing this at the outset.
I don't think conceptually it's any more complex, because if you've never done it, if you've never done anything before, it's all quite new, isn't it? It's like if you never used the JS dev environment before, and you look at there's all these files with like words in them, like, what is this?
Oh no!
Exactly, but I don't know. I don't think it's any more conceptually complex.
Okay, good point.
Because I think people in FileMaker, we're used to things being self-loading. We're used to a portal being, you put the portal on the layout and you know what fields are in there, and as it displays, the rest of the window appears, and that's going to go off and load whatever it does. And we know that, however far that data is away, it's going to fire. We understand, script triggers that kind of happen, and these things kind of kick it off. The only thing you really need to be aware of is that the script triggers in FileMaker, there's kind of one more place. The web viewer, the script called by the web viewer is the equivalent of the script trigger, and that's the one thing which you then understand. You can understand, right, okay, I've got some placeholder stuff. A script gets called to request some data, that processes the data and puts it back and calls this JavaScript function in the web viewer to then process it. I don't think that's actually significantly more complex than
Joe. You I know you're kind of the newest one to this. What are you thinking about the idea?
Well, I'm trying to understand. It sounds to me like there's a function that you use in JavaScript, and it's been packaged in a piece of code called FM Gopher, where you can trigger a script within FileMaker by calling that function. We could write it ourselves in JavaScript, but Halpern's put it out there as FM Gopher, and it's just perform script or something. It's like a library.
It's an asynchronous library that allows us to fetch data from FileMaker. It will cause a FileMaker script to run, and it will go and do something in FileMaker, either return data or just do something inside of the FileMaker file.
So what parameters do you give it? Does it default to the FileMaker application that you're in, or do you give it names? Yep. It defaults, okay. And then you give it the script name, and then you put this in the JavaScript. And so this is what you're considering self-loading. It's like a script trigger because that piece is in there.
That is correct.
Or is it? Okay. Now, when you were showing in the calculation engine how you calling a custom function, that's a little different. What's that about?
That's just another way to do it. It's a way to get to self-load the web viewer with some initial properties.
But what triggers that? I mean, it looked like every time you change records on record load, but it's obviously not on record load.
That's because the web viewer is a calculation engine. That calculation engine is just going to run that custom function every time that custom function is run.
Okay, very good.
It goes and fetches the HTML and it passes some initial props in. So those initial properties could be like the type of the chart, the data, the title of it, the categories maybe, and then once that is loaded in and you can see the title of the chart and the type of chart, you can see maybe the grid, then it goes and fetches the data using the FM Gopher, and it plops the data into the web viewer. So there's two times when it's loaded. The HTML is loaded first with some initial properties, and those are set, and then the data gets fetched and gets put into the web viewer. The way that I'm teaching you is we're going to load the HTML in, but we're not going to render it until we have the data, when everything pops into place at once.
Right. We set the data back in the script, and then we pop it all in there at once with the button, the load HTML. But there's so in a sense, you're almost like trying to make a model view controller. You're almost like trying to make a controller app in here where your JavaScript is it's not an event listener, but it's your view, and then you've got a store of data. In a sense, we're kind of recreating that environment in a very small way, but we have to come back. We have to call back to FileMaker so that it will run a script.
Yes.
It's interesting. I mean, I haven't used the web viewer enough to. I mean, conceptually it makes sense. I don't think I could do it today. Just run in there and do it. But I mean, I could copy and paste. I'm really good at that.
And I think that's the next step. I think I'm feeling good about teaching people this way, once they get comfortable working with this, then we can move people into a different level where they can build these. And you're right, Marcus, I should have a different version of the dev environment that contains everything that it should have with the self-loading idea. And then people can, you know, choose to use them. And I can also teach people how to convert one into the other. So
Well, that would be my other question too.